Okay, good morning, everybody. We'll just give people 1 minute to get joined and online, and then we'll get cracking with today's roundtable. Thank you for those who've joined us on time this morning. Okay, so good morning and welcome to today's roundtable, Why Sustainability Still Drives Value in an Increasingly Uncertain World. This webinar is part of Net Zero Week 2025, which is the UK's official national awareness week for net zero and the biggest net zero conference. So before I hop into introductions around the room, a quick order of service for you this morning. So why does this topic matter now? So over the last 5 to 10 years, we've seen consistent increases in regulator pressure, which has really driven the sustainability agenda across the UK and Europe. However, we're now seeing increasing political uncertainty, particularly in the last 6 to 12 months, with the new administration in the US in January this year, and also the EU Omnibus package in Europe, which came in February 2025. And that reduces requirements for companies within the EU under CBAM and CSRD for certain businesses. So we feel like it's a really important time to take stock and consider the ongoing benefits of sustainability in an uncertain world. So we'll start with some key sustainability trends for 2025, and I've got the team involved in picking them out as well. We'll also be looking at the UK sustainability reporting standards, which are currently under consultation. We'll then move on to the panel discussion, talking about sustainability in an uncertain world. And then we'll finish with some case studies and some actionable insights for you, and a little bit of a Q&A session. So feel free to drop questions in the chat as we go, and we'll pick them up at the end of today's session. Okay, so introduce the people in the room today. We've got myself, so my name's Liz Wood, and I head up the consultancy team at Beyondly. We've also got Susanna over here, and Susanna heads up our Beyondly sustainability strategy, and she also delivers consultancy on ESG and carbon for customers. To my right, we've got Sean, so he's our in-house energy efficiency expert and leads on all our energy efficiency projects, so things like Energy Savings Opportunity Scheme compliance. And then we've got Christy and Ben either side. So Christy and Ben are both sustainability analysts and work with our clients on a range of carbon and energy related projects. So it's really nice to have us all in the same room today to have this roundtable discussion. So who are Beyondly? Beyondly are a B Corp environmental consultancy and compliance scheme. So we work with approximately 2,000 customers. We help our customers to become more confident in their environmental choices. So services that we offer range from compliance with packaging, electricals, batteries and textile regulations, both in the UK and internationally, through to our consultancy services. So delivered by the team in the room today and a few others on carbon, sustainability and resource efficiency. We were established as a business in 2006, originally trading as Comply Direct, and we rebranded to Beyondly in 2023 when we became a B Corp. So what really makes Beyondly different, in my opinion, is our people, our team, and also that we put our customers at the heart of everything that we do. So with that in mind, I thought it was just worth a recap on our services. So we do support people, whatever stage in their sustainability journey. And this has really evolved over the years to kind of meet the needs of our customer base. So we separate our services into fundamental services, accelerator services, and then those for the leaders. And we also have different pathways. So it might be that you want to focus on carbon, resources and waste, or ESG, but we like to think we've got something to support everybody, and you can click on the web link there to find more about our services. Okay, so without further ado, let's get on with the webinar. So firstly, I've just got a handful of slides to set the scene for our discussions. I asked the team here at Beyondly to help me out with their take on key trends for 2025 and why sustainability remains really important for business. So I'm going to make a start here with one of my absolute favourite slides. I think there's so much information here in one graph. So really, this just highlights that we are not hitting climate targets. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, so the IPCC, say that we need to keep global warming below 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. So if you look on here, that is the kind of mint green line, and you can see where we should be is that 1.5 degree pathway. So even with the pledges and targets that have been set, we're still looking to exceed that. And with no climate policies, we'd be looking at up to 5 degrees of warming. So this is really important, this 1.5 degree threshold, because once we get above that, we hit really big consequences for businesses and supply chains in terms of things like destruction of plant habitat, changes in species ranges, crop failures, which then lead to secondary impacts, so things like mass migration due to crop failures and that kind of thing. So really important for businesses to kind of get a handle, and I think this graph just highlights that we're not where we need to be currently. Which leads me really nicely into my second area, which I've chosen, which is every year the World Economic Forum look at global risks, and they do this over different time horizons. So you've got a 2-year time horizon and a 10-year. And again, the key message here is that there's many and varied risks to businesses. So you can see there's technological risks, geopolitical risks, but in green on here, you see the environmental risks. So even within the next 2 years, you're looking at extreme weather events and pollution risks to businesses. But over 10 years, the environmental risks really grow. And there's a huge amount of risk to businesses in terms of needing to adapt to future climate and also needing to reduce their impact to try and mitigate against any further impacts on business. So I'm going to hand over to Susanna now.
Thanks, Liz. So yeah, not only are we seeing a lot of these global sort of trends going on, we're also seeing a shift in consumers and what they're doing with their money. So this PwC survey released in 2024 found quite a few quite striking statistics that are listed on the screen there. 80% of consumers saying they're willing to pay more for sustainably produced or sourced goods. 46% are buying more sustainable products as a way to reduce their impact on the environment, and several more there, which just shows that there's a bit of a shift in terms of consumers wanting to buy from environmentally conscious businesses and businesses that are doing the right thing. And I think we're also seeing that sort of shift in employees as well. Employees are wanting to work for businesses that are environmentally conscious, that are making good environmental and social impacts, and just aligning with those standards such as B Corp and Business for Good. Employees are wanting to start working for those sorts of businesses, and that will attract loyal and talented employees to work for those sort of businesses as well. And then on the next slide, I've just sort of collated some studies from various different papers looking at ESG. So the graph on the left looked at low ESG risk portfolios versus high ESG risk portfolios, and how they performed across 3 different financial crises. And as you can see, the low ESG risk portfolios had a higher return each time. And then the study on the right had a look at sort of the impact of ESG and financial performance. And it actually found that 58% of corporate studies had a positive ESG to financial performance link. So that really just shows that companies that have that lower ESG risk or have invested in sustainability tend to outperform those traditional companies that don't. And that is really just aligned with the investors seeing those ESG high performing companies as less risky and more future proof, which leads to lower borrowing costs and higher valuations as well.
Thanks, Susie. That leads us nicely on to Christy, who's going to talk a little bit more about B Corps.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, we've seen a rise in B Corps over the last few years, and essentially these are businesses that not only focus on profit but are also prioritising people and the planet as well. I won't read all of the little stats out there. We will send the slides afterwards. But sort of as Susanna mentioned as well, B Corps are becoming more attractive to employers, other businesses in terms of collaborations and investment opportunities as well. And there's that sort of key stat at the bottom as well saying B Corp small firms outperform rivals with 23% boost in revenues. So they're also seeing an increase in turnover and finances as well.
Thanks, Christy. And Sean's going to talk to us a little bit about the Carbon Disclosure Project.
Yes, thanks, Liz. So we've seen supply chain reporting demands are certainly increasing, with more and more customers insisting that their suppliers get on board with this disclosure. We've seen increase in reporting in terms of topics like human rights, ESG, biodiversity, and that's certainly increasing with increased spotlight in that area in both the news and just the industry in general. So as a result, the scope of the CDP survey is widening. From 2024, we'll see the forest and water sections merged and become a main part of the main survey itself. So we're certainly seeing increased pressure within the CDP area. Just go on to the slide, please. Thank you. Another common trend that we're seeing is more and more businesses are setting science-based targets, meaning they're committing to measuring their emissions for both their organisation and in their supply chain. The SBT, Science-Based Targets Initiative, is the most widely used targeting initiative for measuring emissions. What does it mean if your targets are science-based targets? It means your targets are essentially in line with what the latest climate science says is necessary to limit emissions reduction to 90 to 95% by 2050. Because of this, many companies are working to reduce their emissions within their supply chain and their organisation in general. We're seeing increased collaboration within the supply chain as well.
Sean.
Yeah, so thanks, Sean, for talking about the voluntary and very consumer and business-led approach to regulations. So we've got the UK SRS on the screen right now, but it's definitely worth mentioning the wider regulation frameworks that and the changes that have happened in particularly the last 6 months. So in the EU, we've observed quite a large drawback in terms of reporting obligations from CSRD and CBAM through the omnibus situation that was happening and unfolding earlier on in the year. So they're now primarily focused on larger businesses while still managing to cover the majority of emissions generated within the EU. And then now discussing the UK SRS, which had recently outlined their targets in terms of how they're differentiating themselves from the CSRD. They've not yet confirmed whether this will be mandatory as CSRD is in the EU, but this is looking forward into the future that it could be in the future. The consultation, as we see on screen, closes on the 17th of September 2025, as it is based on the IFRS S1 and S2, and more details can be seen on screen, and the UK SRS reporting standards will be open to the public soon.
Thanks, Ben. I think it'll be really interesting to see where the UK government sits with UK SRS. As Ben said, it's currently going to be voluntary, so it'll be interesting to see if there's any move to make that mandatory over time.
So this is just another study that we've pulled out to show you today. It's called the Willow Review, and it was released quite recently in June. It's actually a really interesting paper, and finds that sustainability can actually produce financial benefit. So again, there's quite a few stats on the screen. We'll send out the slides, but key ones: 67% of SMEs actually reduced their operational costs, and that was through changes to energy or waste or the materials they're using. 52% actually attracted new customers due to the sustainability efforts. So that's looping back into what I was saying earlier about businesses that are making these efforts and having a good environmental impact are starting to attract employees and new customers because of that. So it really just demonstrates that it's not just an environmental imperative, but it's a really clear commercial opportunity for small businesses, and they can really utilise that within their financial performance going forwards. And then it's also a key driver for innovation. So again, we've got another sort of quote on the screen there that businesses incorporating sustainability into strategic frameworks are 1.4 times more likely to achieve innovation breakthroughs. And I think a lot of that comes from sustainability driving that shift from that linear take, make, use, dispose model towards more businesses looking at how they can reuse materials, how they can focus on recycling, and drive that innovation through changing product design or looking at development in order to reduce the resource use and reduce waste. So it really tries to embed that long-term thinking within businesses and drive that continuous improvement and innovation opportunities.
Perfect. Thank you, Susanna. So just a quick recap there of some of the things that we've picked out for 2025 as sustainability trends. So global temperatures and emissions continue to rise. We are seeing that climate-related impacts do present financial risks to businesses and in particular their supply chains. The continued rise of the green consumer, so people are voting with their feet when it comes to purchasing based on sustainability credentials. And then for that reason, sustainability can be a market differentiator for some businesses, in particular B Corps capitalising on this. So a focus as well on emissions associated with products, as Susanna talked about, moving away from a take, make, dispose model towards a more circular economy, so maintaining the value in materials. And then as Sean mentioned, businesses are looking beyond carbon emissions. So they don't just want reports on your carbon emissions as a business, they're also looking on what are you doing on ESG, what are you doing on supply chain due diligence, ethics, community. So the whole picture and a real widening of that. And I think in particular, one that we've perhaps missed on this slide is the Science Based Targets Initiative. Because if businesses at the top of the supply chain are setting science-based targets, that means everyone within that supply chain is then kind of obliged to reduce their emissions as well. So really important one, and one we're seeing a lot of impact from. Okay, so moving forward into the panel discussion itself, I've got a few questions for the guys in the room today, and then obviously we will take questions at the end as well. So if anything pops to mind as we're discussing, feel free to drop it in the questions panel. So my first question is, how can businesses stay committed to sustainability amid political uncertainty?
Yeah, I can take that. So I think we've touched on it right at the start, really, in terms of what's going on in the political environment, what's going on in Europe, what's going on in the UK. So it is a really key question, I think, at the forefront of a lot of businesses' mind at the moment. I think what businesses need to remember is turbulence is temporary, but climate is going to continue to change going forwards. And there is actually a 10-year lag between the warming that's going on now and the impact of what that's going to change down the line. So businesses need to remember that and think about how they can adjust their supply chain to make it more resilient to what's going to be coming in the future with the extreme weather and various other impacts that we've sort of touched on. I think as well, it doesn't have to be really burdensome. So there is help out there, and companies don't have to try and take it all on themselves. They can outsource, particularly the sort of difficult data-driven measurement side, to calculate the emissions to consultants and to sort of third parties. And what they need to do is concentrate on what actions they can take to be reducing the emissions and focus on what's going to save them money and save them energy, and look to the support that's out there available elsewhere. And I think another point is don't be driven by the minimum requirements of regulations. So focus on what makes sense to you as a business, what are your goals, what's important to you. Is it that product innovation side that we discussed earlier? Is it sort of saving energy and energy conservation? And just focus on it a bit at a time and try to prioritise what's going to work for your business best.
Thanks, Susie. I think one of the things that we often get, and one of the misconceptions around sustainability, is that it's kind of a cost and it's going to add cost to business. So I really wanted to ask the room just what are the tangible benefits that you can see from embedding sustainability within your business?
Yeah, I'm happy to start that one. So you can certainly see like enhanced relationships with both your customers and suppliers. From a customer point of view, increasingly consumers have a real environmental agenda around the things that they are purchasing. So developing your environmental strategy can certainly increase that loyalty with your customers, so you'll get repeat purchasing, and then also you're doing the right thing as well. In terms of suppliers, the environmental and carbon elements are becoming massive parts of large contract tenders. So again, developing your environmental strategy, it'll help solidify your position within winning those tenders and also strengthening relationships with your suppliers as well. By completing things also like a regular energy audit, you can identify energy waste, which will save you obviously energy, time, cost, and also carbon. It's quite often the case that we'll go on site and we'll see things like air conditioning running with windows open, machinery running with no one using it. So simple wins still exist, and there is often lots of energy wastage within all companies that can be eliminated.
That's Sean's favourite one, his favourite bugbear. Thanks for that, Sean. So just thinking now about sort of some of the things that we mentioned earlier on about business risks and financial value. So my next question is, how can we align sustainability with core business risks and financial value?
Yeah, so I touched on this earlier with the graphs I pulled from those studies from ESG risk. And I think the key message there is environmental risks do pose a real material potential financial impact to businesses. And embedding sustainability is about proactively identifying those risks and measuring them and trying to mitigate against them. So looking at the climate change impacts, looking at the supply chain shocks and social unrest potentially, what is going to have a material impact on your business and how can you mitigate against that. And I think embedding it really means businesses are less likely to face scandals or potential regulatory fines for not aligning with legislation. So there's that side of it as well. If you need to sort of convince your board or the sort of decision makers why you need to be considering these risks on a day-to-day basis, it can help prevent some financial issues down the line. And I think what we've seen and what we've actually done at Beyondly as well is setting KPIs, setting targets and goals around those sustainable issues at a company level, and having those goals and metrics in place, and the board sort of at a board level being aware of them and being accountable for them and assigning responsibilities to achieve those can help manage those risks and opportunities and help the business as a whole understand sustainability. And I think everyone in a business has a part to play as well in managing those risks. So it's not all on the board or not all on senior management, but you could potentially set your procurement team some goals around making sure that they're sustainably sourcing and looking at performance of suppliers. You can introduce scoring metrics, leaderboards that can work really well with that sort of thing. And even HR, they could look to be recruiting the right people into the right roles, looking at green and ethical recruitment, and those that are going to be really invested in helping the company achieve those sustainability goals that you've set out. So you can get everyone involved, and I think that really drives forward the culture of embedding sustainability in the day-to-day.
Thanks, Susanna. It's good to kind of touch on the people side. So I think that's something that we've done at Beyondly, is really try and recruit people who kind of have the same ethos and develop a culture of recycling and sustainability. putting things in the right bins is always a good start in the office canteen as well. So thanks for that. So in terms of reporting frameworks, Ben, I think the next one might be one for you. I know you touched on it in your slides at the start, but with the UK SRS and ISSB, like how important are these in driving internal value, and how might that change if they're not, the legislation maybe isn't as strong as it might have been in the past, in the future?
I think it's very important in terms of reporting frameworks, because the mandatory frameworks that we already have in the UK, lower down the scale, such as SECR and ESOS, which are still large companies, have driven very clear, notable progress for these businesses, as we've witnessed in nearly every company that we've worked with. And there are a few outliers maybe, but most of them do what they want and do well. They offer a really valuable baseline in terms of structures for businesses starting out that are maybe just getting over the threshold or have blown up and need to get into it, but then have another system of thinking, oh, this worked really well, this saved us money, this saved us energy, we can do more than that. And working with consultancies such as ourselves, that's definitely a good way to start out. But there needs to be a bit of a drive towards doing your own thing and going into the more voluntary markets. In terms of internal value creation is unique to each company. ESOS can be difficult for some companies, say, but for some it's very clear where there's easy gains and some that's longer gains that people aren't quite prepared to go for. I think the key advice in terms of UK SRS and CBAM, that we've been waiting a long time for these. So SRS has been in development for 2 years now. We're not at the final stage. There's always going to be revisits to it and improvements to it and changes until it's set. And even with the EU omnibus, it was set. And then a few years later, it was whittled down a little bit. So there is going to be movement, but these standards are likely to outlast a government, say, that change every 5 years. You'd be hopeful that it wouldn't change every 5 years. It would improve, push more people to do better. So aligning with the mandatory standards is important, but focusing where your organisation can save money, energy, emissions is the most important part. Looking inside your company instead of waiting for the government to tell you where your gains are, because they'll be so much more specific than what the government say are the best gains. So yeah, as a final kind of thing, start the journey now and don't get stuck debating which framework is best for your company.
I think that's a really good one, Ben. I think we've seen so many frameworks. I know we have internal knowledge share sessions and there's constantly new frameworks, new standards, new legislation, but actually when you get to the core of it, the basics are the same in nearly all of them. It's like, look at your risks, look at your opportunities, start measuring your carbon emissions and a few other material things. So really important just to get started and not hang around for the standards, I think. So just taking it away from standards a little bit now, I wanted to just switch to supply chains. So how do supply chains and strategies need to evolve in a more uncertain and global world?
Yeah, I'll do this one. I think this kind of covers and brings in a lot of what we've already been talking about. Obviously, there are lots of regulations coming in. There's a lot more pressure on suppliers from customers and other people within the supply chain as well. And obviously, the effects of global warming, we might not be seeing them just now, but it might affect later down the line in terms of, deliveries, shipments, things like that as well, especially if things are coming from worldwide. Especially as like the extreme weather events are more likely to increase too. So I think the biggest thing probably that is a challenge, I suppose, at the minute is having that communication within the supply chain and having those conversations with customers or other suppliers, whether that's on like actual data and emissions. And we might be seeing things like product carbon footprints becoming more of a requirement too. So that'll put a lot of pressure there as well. So I think starting to have those conversations and also internally having the resource, whether that's a supply chain manager or somebody, to kind of start looking at those environmental and social factors as well, to kind of make sure that everybody's on the same page and sort of aligning together as well.
Cool. Thank you, Christy. So I think just to summarise and bring that all together, I think why does sustainability still matter in an increasingly uncertain world? For me, it's kind of, there's opportunities, like Sean says, to save energy and money. There are still instances where businesses are not operating as efficiently as they might be. So things like energy audits can be a great start there. I think also, to Christie's point, there's actually opportunities to work more closely with your customers to establish like long-term relationships with customers based on the fact that you are so embedded within their supply chain and systems. You have all the sustainability stuff that they need. You're able to report the data that they need for their strategy. So there's opportunities there to work with your customers and also with your suppliers. So something that we've done at Beyondly, like upskilling our procurement teams, so that when they go on site to do procurement, they can also be looking at emissions from the site, looking at energy savings from the site as well, and also building those relationships with the right suppliers that kind of understand where we want to be and what we want to be supplying to our customers. And then I think driving innovation as well and competitiveness is a really good point as well. Okay, so moving on, it's always nice with these webinars to have something you can kind of take home as a case study or an actionable insight. So wanted to talk a little bit about Beyondly and what we've done. So we understand that a lot of you joining today won't necessarily be a similar service-based business, but maybe there's something here that you can kind of take away and run with. So we're really fortunate. We're based up in Skipton on Broughton Hall Estate, which is absolutely beautiful, but we have no natural gas supply here at all. So up until about 3 or 4 years ago, we were serviced off a kerosene boiler. So it became a bit of a personal mission to get that boiler out of function, and we installed with our landlord the ground source heat pump. So you can see the tubing in the trunking on the ground on that slide. We also have an electric pool car that we use for on-site customer visits. One of our things that is probably quite unique is the employee car share scheme. So if you share a car with an employee on the way to work, which I think Sean and Susie did today, then you can claim your petrol, essentially mileage claim through that once a week. And that's allowed us to dramatically reduce our employee commuting mileage. So we're kind of, because we're not in the middle of Skipton, we don't have public transport routes. So a lot of employees do need to come by vehicle. But if we can try and get sort of 4 or 5 people in a car, then that's much better. We also do a lot of work with our procurement team, so upskilling them, and with our supply chain base as well, because we understand that a lot of our emissions are in our supply chain rather than our office. When I was trying to think of some really key ideas, some simple and practical steps and actions to recommend, I really liked this from the Willow Review. So this was specifically aimed at SMEs, but given the diversity of registrants today and the sectors represented, I think there's something here in these 5 points that everybody can take away. And it's about thinking about how it applies to your business. So things like switching to sustainable materials within your products and packaging, reducing travel and optimizing logistics, minimizing waste. And that doesn't necessarily mean just municipal waste, so like your bins, wasted energy, wasted resource, thinking about taking action on energy, so getting Sean out to do an energy audit, partnering with sustainable suppliers and customers, so working with people who share your values, and working with your customers to kind of educate them as well. And also just the idea of joining networks and working together. So as a B Corp, we're part of like the Beehive network and the Be Local networks, and we get a lot out of that. And also just thinking about tracking sustainability measures. And I think Susie said earlier, like, don't feel like that's burdensome, maybe outsource some of the measurement stuff so that you can get on with tackling the reductions, which is where you're ultimately going to hopefully save some energy. So a bit of a thought-provoking slide, really, to just go back to basics, I think, and think about how you can apply them within your business or industry. I just wanted to touch on our Navigate service. So if you've enjoyed the webinar today, Just before we go into questions, I just wanted to highlight this service. It's something new that we've been doing for 2025, and it's rapidly become one of my favourite services to deliver. I think because selfishly we get to go into so many different businesses and translate sustainability into their language and something that they can move forward with. So they're 3-hour sessions with our expert team. We normally take 2 of us along. And they're normally delivered on site to kind of senior leaders within businesses. And the idea really is to help you to understand the sustainability landscape in your sector, to look at the opportunities and risks for your business. And we also do quite a bit of analysis on your customers and your peer group and advise you on the next steps wherever you are on that sustainability journey that we showed up earlier, where you might like to go. So they're really fun sessions, and we've had some really positive feedback on them so far, so maybe something to consider. Okay, so thank you very much for your attention today. So this webinar was part of Net Zero Week, and there will be more live webinars available throughout this week. So please have a look at netzeroweek.com and see if there's anything there that takes your fancy. For now, we're going to move to questions. So I'm just going to seamlessly switch my view so that I can see questions.
100%.
There we go. Perfect. So hopefully you can see us guys in the room, and I'll open up the questions now. See what we've got. Okay, so we've got a question here from Andrew around greenwashing. So he attended a seminar last week on the EU Green Claim Directive and the potential for a lot of UK brands to be highlighted as breaking the Green Claims Code Directive. Will the UK adopt this directive, or has we been excluded? So that is an EU directive, so it won't automatically translate in the UK. We do have the Green Claims Code within the UK, but it is not as stringent as that EU Green Claims Directive. So you would hope that businesses that are trading within both the UK and the EU would take that directive as a lead for their UK business, but it won't be kind of mandated within the UK, and I'm certainly not aware of anything other than the Green Claims Code at the moment for the UK.
It doesn't mean to say it won't come through eventually as well, with things like, obviously, CBAM started in the EU and it's something that we've decided to implement, so it will be something that gets implemented in the future.
So we've got another question here from Jim talking about how we can effectively communicate ESG messages to an increasingly sceptical public and political audience, and whether ESG is in fact the correct term and whether we should be looking at a different term. I don't know if Susie, you've got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think ESG has been around for quite a few years now, and it has sort of transitioned from that original corporate sustainable responsibility. I think ESG has just grown massively in terms of what it encompasses. So it's not only looking at the environmental impacts, it's looking at what you're doing on the social side, what you're doing for your employees, what you're doing for community, as well as the governance side, looking at corruption and ethics and risk management. And I think it is such a broad term, but I think it is really useful, and it's about the way that companies translate ESG as a concept or a framework into their day-to-day reporting. So it's about sort of looking at, from those ESG factors, what are the most material to your business, and then communicating that in a way that makes various different audiences understand it. So people might not understand materiality, but it's sort of explaining in the report that we've looked at what the big impacts are from our business, how are we impacting the environment, how are we impacting society, and what are we going to focus on to set targets around, to measure, in order to have the biggest impact and make the biggest changes that are most relevant for our business. And there will always be criticism of it. There's always going to be criticism of all these different sustainability initiatives. There's so many of them. There's so many different abbreviations and jargon, as we've touched on today. But I think it's just, as we've been sort of saying, this key message throughout, doing what's right for your business, what do you need to focus on, and then communicating that as well as you can to your customers or to other stakeholders like suppliers. And a really good way of doing that is producing an ESG report. And you can do that in whatever format works for you and your business, but essentially it outlines everything that you've done in the previous financial year, in terms of the positive impacts you've made, where you might not have done so well, and what you're going to do going forward to tackle that. And really, I don't see how people can criticise that if you've put everything, you've been really transparent within that report, you've laid everything out, and you've communicated that as best as you can to your stakeholders, and that's all you can really do. And I think if you just, like I say, do it in the right way and communicate it without the greenwash and be really open and honest and transparent, then that's the best way forward.
Yeah, I think I agree with that, because it encompasses so much that if you do break it down into the individual sections and output them as individual sections, it's less transparent because it doesn't contain everything, every side of things. So it's like one report shows everything. If someone wants to read it and make a judgment on your company, then that's the best way to do it, rather than splitting it all up.
Yeah, and I think we have quite a lot of conversations with various different companies and we do so much, but HR knows about the people side and this part of business knows about everything we're doing environmentally, and it's just all sort of all over the place. But if you can combine that into one report that just summarising everything you do on an annual basis, and you can get into that sort of reporting habit, then if you've got a tender and they've asked you, what have you done? Here's an ESG report which summarises everything. So I think it can be really helpful and just support businesses with showcasing what they've done and collaborating it all together.
We do have ours on the website as well if you wanted to check out an example. And I think something that we've been really mindful of is kind of reaching beyond our own impact. And we donate 5% of our profits annually to our Fund for Change fund, and support a number of projects that, like Susanna mentioned, we've done a materiality assessment. These are the areas that are core for our business in terms of impact. And we try and fund projects around them. So we've done projects with WRAP, the Waste and Resources charity, also with Recoup on plastic. So you can get all of that information in our impact report as well about kind of some of the innovative projects that we're doing. And here was me thinking we were going to get through a whole net zero week roundtable without anybody mentioning the word carbon offset. But thanks to Ben, because we do have a comment or a question really around, we obviously mentioned Science Based Targets Initiative, and as many people will know, you cannot use carbon offsets around your near-term targets in order to meet them. But actually, he's asking questions around kind of the science behind carbon credit schemes and carbon offsets, and our thoughts on offsets in general. I don't know if anybody wants to come in on that.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. So obviously you'll have to reduce your emissions by 90 to 95% by 2050. Then under the Science Based Targets Initiative, you can offset that residual 5 to 10%. However, the current specification is that it's carbon removals, meaning it'll be a project that sequesters and stores that carbon long term. There are varying different types of carbon offsets. There's carbon avoidance, where you're essentially removing carbon from another area rather than reducing it. So yeah, it'll be focusing on carbon removal offsets to get that remaining 5%. However, I wouldn't concentrate too much on that now, because as I say, it's the remaining 5%. The main area that you need to be focusing on is the reduction and reducing the amount of emissions direct for your organisation, but also within your supply chain.
I think the carbon offset market can be quite murky, and people are always a bit nervous about going for carbon offsets and whether they're credible or whether it's the right thing to do. And I think it's just about, again, the way you're communicating it. So off the back of the EU Green Claims Code, they kind of said try and avoid using the term carbon neutral. So a lot of people are sort of trying to swerve away from that. But I think offsets can still play a decent part. So a lot of these projects are supporting biodiversity benefits or social benefits. So you could buy the offsets, but it's alongside that sort of reduction journey, like it's in addition to rather than instead of. So I think you can tell a nice story and fund these projects that are doing good, but it's not, like you said, it's not the main focus of the reduction journey.
Yeah, definitely. And with, as sustainability and environmental professionals, we've all heard the statement many times of that there is no silver bullet to climate change, and there certainly isn't. But yeah, they can be used as a tool, but not the main tool, one of the tools.
Yeah, a theme in the feedback, just as we're taking these questions, have been the mention of carbon insetting, and kind of looking to, so that's different to offsetting, which is outside projects outside of your sort of supply chain, whereas insetting is within your supply chain, and particularly popular at the moment within kind of food and agricultural sectors, looking at like green farming and nature conservation and restoration projects. So yeah, that is an option. I think we're currently obviously awaiting the final draft of the Greenhouse Gas Protocol land removals guidance to understand exactly what the bar is going to be for those carbon insets within supply chains, or those carbon reductions. It is going to be high. It's going to be a high bar that you're going to need to show that impact and prove that those carbon reductions are occurring within your supply chain, which I think we would all support. It needs to be done properly and not kind of used as an easy way out. But done properly, carbon insetting can be preferable to something outside of your supply chain. Have also had a comment, have we thought about doing a carbon offsetting training course, kind of giving people the tools they need to judge different projects against each other, thinking about carbon insetting as well. So that's real food for thought for us in the room as well. So thank you for that. Okay. Yeah, some comments again, just echoing the direction of travel in the US with the move against kind of ESG. Sorry, we've got loads of questions, which is okay. So what do we say about the kind of degrowth agenda? So isn't there simply a linear relationship between the amount of economic activity and overall carbon output? When you consider carbon reduction projects aside, like, do we need to actually just be kind of honest and say that we can't decouple growth and carbon? I think that's an interesting one. I think what we're seeing is that a lot of rapidly growing businesses and successful businesses at the moment are managing to decouple carbon and are actually coming up with innovative low carbon solutions which actually bring them closer to their customers as well. So changing methods of ownership model. So rather than owning a product, you would lease that product and give it back at the end of its life. There's benefits there. But ultimately, I guess you are making fewer of that product. So it's a different sort of economy to the.
I think also there's kind of a mindset shift that I think needs to happen going forwards in order to really tackle climate change. So a lot of what the B Corp movement focuses on is it's not just profit that should be the main focus for businesses. A lot of businesses have always been profit driven, and that's been the sort of short-term goal year on year. But now we're seeing a lot of the risks happening from climate change that are going to be here for the long term. So actually looking at that trickle bottom line and taking account of people and the planet as well is going to financially help your business in the long run. And that short-term profit thinking isn't really going to be sustainable going forward. So you need to be shifting your mindset as a business to think about the whole picture, really holistically, think about all the stakeholders that are involved. And that's sort of the pinnacle of what the B Corp movement tries to do is sort of make businesses take account of everything going forwards. Obviously profit's always going to be important in businesses, but there's so many other factors that are coming into play and that businesses are becoming more aware of, and the impacts of those and the risks of not tackling them sort of need to be considered as well.
Yeah, I think profit is important because it allows you to reinvest into your company and into like the B Corp movement and into the wider community landscapes and energy contracts and stuff like that that can move forward, and it allows you to spend more on better procurement and everything like that. So yeah, profit is important for now and always will be, but it's hard to decouple, I suppose, if you also do need it to then reinvest back in. So it is a bit of a cycle that goes around, but it's just a slight mindset change, like you say.
It's a difficult balance to strike, but
Yeah. That may be fine.
yeah.
Yeah, so I've got another question from Jason. So they're a fellow B Corp and they're currently recertifying. They've been the first to market with a digital product passport for their products, so really forward thinking. They're in the homewares sector, so FMCG homewares. Unfortunately, what they're struggling with is customers kind of not necessarily seeing the commercial benefit or wanting to pay extra for products with sustainable credentials. And is there anything that we could suggest to kind of engage on? I think we talked a lot about engaging with suppliers, but to engage with customers on your product and how you can kind of sell those sustainable credentials. That's a tricky question, Jason.
Yeah, I think it's always going to be a tricky one with customers because obviously they are buying your product at the end of the day. It's not like you've got the same buying power you do with suppliers. But I think it's just about the educational piece, really, sort of making the customers as aware as you can on what the impacts of that product are, and maybe trying to, create some sort of model that is like sort of a take back scheme or something that's going to benefit the customer but will also benefit the environment, and yeah, just really making them understand what that full environmental impact, what the life cycle of that sofa involves, or piece of furniture or whatever it is. I know the textiles industry is a really difficult industry to decarbonise, and there's a lot of issues around sort of recycling, so as much as we can do to prevent that and try and make positive impacts going forward. And I think, like we saw earlier in the PwC consumer study, there are customers out there who are willing to pay more. So you're always going to get some that aren't, some that are. But I think as a business, you just focus on the sustainability side and shouting about that, and you will draw in those customers that are aligned with that and want to buy from those sort of businesses as well.
Yeah, I think the key thing really is the right customers that kind of fit and understand the benefit. So those ethical sort of supermarket type customers might be a good one. Right.
I think also with that it might not be an immediate draw for them, but as you are like an early adopter of it and the EU looking to implement product passports and such, there will be the drive for the purchaser to want that. So it may come in the near future, but it might not be fully immediate right now, but it will come.
I think a really valuable contribution from Nicholas in the chat as well, just mentioning that overall the green sector needs to think about product offerings. So quite often there's a green premium on products, but actually there's no real reason why innovation couldn't bring cheaper options to the market as well, and in a lot of cases it does. So maybe looking at whether actually green always is a premium. It's an interesting contribution, thank you. Okay, so I think we're going to draw the webinar to a close at that point. Again, thanks very much for joining us. If we haven't got around to your question, we will check through all the questions at the end and ensure that you have a follow-up by email. If you do have any questions for us, I think our emails are readily available on the website. So yeah, I'm always open to a conversation. So thanks very much again for joining us and have a brilliant week. Thanks guys, bye.
Thank you.